Welcome to this episode of the Harpreet Singh Show. I'm your host Harpreet Singh from Surrey, British Columbia, Canada. The show had partnered with Sarhad Anhad Naad Sanjha Punjab Festival, an offshoot of Majha House in Amritsar, to bring to you for a month issues for Punjabi diaspora which are spread all across the world, and especially between India and Pakistan, how we can have better relations. This topic on which there is a talk today is absolutely important, and the focus is on crossing borders, a conversation about peace across borders. Eminent personalities Nirupama Rao, Abdul Basit, a former ambassador, Sanjoy Hazarika, and Preeti Gill will join and talk on this important issue. So let's join and learn as to what all is happening and how we can develop better relations between both the countries.
Good evening, Assalamu alaikum, Adab, Sat Shri Akal, Namaskar, Ji Aaya nu, Khush Aamdeed. A beautiful thought which was nurtured, which was conceptualized 3 years back, is being nurtured wonderfully by Preeti Gill and Gugu Gill and the team of Majha House, an offshoot of Majha House, the Sanjha Punjab. And Sanjha Punjab da ek khoobsurat Sarhad Anhad Naad, ਖੂਬਸੂਰਤ ਫੈਸਟੀਵਲ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਅਸੀਂ ਡੈਡੀਕੇਟ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਮਲਾ ਬਸੀਨ ਸਾਹਿਬਾ ਨੂੰ, ਔਰ ਇਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮਾਣ ਹੈ, ਫਖਰ ਹੈ, ਇਜਾਜ਼ ਹਾਸਿਲ ਹੋਇਆ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਪੂਰੇ ਫੈਸਟੀਵਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ ਚੜ੍ਹਦੇ ਤੇ ਲਹਿੰਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਡਾਇਸਪੋਰਾ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਨਾ ਖੂਬਸੂਰਤੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋੜਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਾਮਯਾਬ ਹੋਏ, ਔਰ ਮਾਝਾ ਹਾਊਸ ਇੱਕ ਬ੍ਰਿਜ ਬਣਿਆ ਪੀਸ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਅਮਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਮੁਹੱਬਤ ਵਾਸਤੇ। ਮੈਂ ਤਹਿ ਦਿਲ ਤੋਂ ਧੰਨਵਾਦ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹਨਾ, ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ ਅਦਾ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹਨਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ ਇੰਸਟੀਟਿਊਸ਼ਨਸ ਦਾ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਤਾਉਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਇਸ ਪੂਰੇ ਫੈਸਟੀਵਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਆਪਣੀ ਸ਼ਮੂਲੀਅਤ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਆਪਣੀ ਸਾਂਝ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਰੇ ਫਹਿਰਿਸਤ ਗਿਮੀ ਟੀਵੀ ਸ਼ਗੁਫਤਾ ਜੀ ਅੱਜ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਨੇ। ਗਿਮੀ ਟੀਵੀ UK ਤੋਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜਿਆ, ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਤੋਂ ਦ ਹਰਪ੍ਰੀਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਸ਼ੋ, ਆਸਟ੍ਰੇਲੀਆ ਤੋਂ AUP ਚੈਨਲ, ਫੈਸਲਾਬਾਦ ਲਹਿੰਦੇ ਪਾਕਿਸਤਾਨ, ਲਹਿੰਦੇ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਤੋਂ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਕਾਲਜ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ, 1947 ਆਰਕਾਈਵ, ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ ਆਫ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਲਾਹੌਰ, ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ ਆਫ ਸਰਗੋਦਾ, ਹਿੰਦੂ ਕਾਲਜ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਸਰ ਐਂਡ ਰਾਜੀਵ ਗਾਂਧੀ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਯੂਨੀਵਰਸਿਟੀ ਆਫ ਲਾਅ ਪੰਜਾਬ। ਇਹਨਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਤਾਉਨ ਕੀਤਾ, ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਤਾਲਬੇ ਇਲਮ ਔਰ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਫੈਕਲਟੀ ਔਰ ਬਹੁਤ ਸਾਰੇ ਹੋਰ ਸਾਡੇ ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਸਾਡੇ ਇਸ ਪੂਰੇ ਫੈਸਟੀਵਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡਾ ਸਾਥ ਦਿੱਤਾ, ਸਾਡੀ ਸ਼ਾਨ ਵਧਾਈ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਹੌਸਲਾ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਰ ਚੰਗਾ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰ ਸਕੀਏ। ਮੈਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਗੁਜ਼ਾਰਿਸ਼ ਕਰਾਂਗਾ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਿ ਆਪਣੇ ਵਿਚਾਰ, ਆਪਣੀਆਂ ਦਿਲ ਦੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਵਲਵਲੇ ਨੇ, ਖੁਆਇਸ਼ਾਂ ਨੇ, ਉਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਂਝੀਆਂ ਕਰੋ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਉਣ ਵਾਲੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਇੱਕ ਚੰਗਾ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਸਿਰਜ ਸਕੀਏ, ਉਹਦੀ ਤਾਮੀਰ ਕਰ ਸਕੀਏ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਚੜ੍ਹਦਾ ਲਹਿੰਦਾ ਤੇ ਡਾਇਸਪੋਰਾ ਇੱਕ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਇਸ ਪੂਰੇ ਬਰੇ ਸਗੀਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਅਮਨ ਦਾ ਪੈਗਾਮ ਫੈਲਾ ਸਕੇ। ਸੋ ਮੈਂ ਗੁਜ਼ਾਰਿਸ਼ ਕਰਾਂਗਾ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਸਰਬਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਜੀ ਬਹਿਲ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਲਰਨਡ ਸਪੀਕਰਸ ਨੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਤਾਰਫ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਵਾਉਣ।
Thank you, Arvinder. Good evening to everyone. Majha House has been hosting this month-long online October festival under the banner of Sanjha Punjab on the theme of Sarhad Anhad Naad, touching upon all the chords of unheard voices across the borders of 3 Punjabs: East Punjab, West Punjab, and Punjab of diaspora, that transcended boundaries of space and time. It was an attempt to create Sanj of synergy and syncretic cultural ethos. Today's episode of Crossing Borders, a conversation among Nirupama Rao, Abdul Basit, and Sanjoy Hazarika, is a culmination of this festival. I have the privilege and pleasure to introduce the speakers of today's session, starting with Nirupama Rao ji. Nirupama Rao is a former Indian Foreign Secretary and was Ambassador of India to China and to the United States. She was High Commissioner of India to Sri Lanka from 2004 to 2006 and also served as spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs from 2001 to 2002. During her diplomatic career, she spent significant time working on the bilateral relationships between India and China and specialized on the history and problems concerning the India-China border and the question of Tibet. In retirement, she has taught at Brown and Columbia universities and was a Pacific Leadership Fellow at the University of California at San Diego. She is currently a Global Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. Nirupama Rao is also the founder of South Asian Symphony Orchestra, a project to promote dialogue and habits of cooperation among young people of South Asian origin and South Asian diaspora through music. Her latest book is The Fractured Himalaya, India, Tibet, China, 1949 to 52. Our next speaker for today's session is Abdul Basit. Abdul Basit is a retired diplomat from Pakistan who served as a former High Commissioner of Pakistan to India. He was appointed to this position in 2014 and was based at Pakistan High Commission in New Delhi. Previously, he served as Pakistan's ambassador to Germany from May 2012 to March 2014. He is the author of Hostility, a Diplomat's Diary on Pakistan-India Relations, published in 2021 by HarperCollins. Today's session's moderator is our own Sanjoy Hazarika. He has been a member of various academic organizations and official committees, including the Justice Jeevan Reddy Committee to Review AFSPA, the Society of Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, and the Northeast India Studies Program at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Hazarika has also worked as a newspaper correspondent, columnist, and documentary filmmaker. Over to Sanjoy Hazarika for today's session. Thank you.
Thank you, both Ambassador Basit and Nirupama, for joining this. Thank you, Majha House and Preeti Kulminder, Arvinderji, and Sarbjot, and the wonderful folks at Image, Majha House, who have laid out and run this fascinating range of events, programs, and truly have explored opportunities of common endeavor and conversation with reflection and dignity, away from noisy studios and the daily stress and pressure of media. We hope at the outset to wish you well and your families, both at this time and all times. For wellness counts much these days, both mental and physical. You've already heard the background of this engaging series of Sanjha Punjab and Majha House, but some of you must be wondering, what's somebody like me who doesn't speak a word of Punjabi except things that you may not wish to hear, who specializes in the northeast of India and its neighborhood, including Myanmar, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Tibet, doing in a conversation like this, which is perhaps by the title to be about the Northwest or the borders of India and Pakistan or Western South Asia. But is this conversation about that really? Should it not be, as Ambassador Basit and Nirupama mentioned in an earlier conversation, that it should be about larger issues? Now, we have two very distinguished diplomats here who are not just specialists in their own field, and I have had the privilege of knowing Nirupama Rao as a Joint Secretary, a specialist, very highly regarded specialist on China, and as Foreign Secretary. And as spokesperson for the government of India, she was one of the real stars. And I met Basit Sahab, Ambassador Basit, only briefly, but very impressed with that, even in that brief encounter. But they're accomplished in other areas. They're veterans of peacemaking and strategic government interventions. And for those of you who are familiar with how governments work, essentially trying to hold the peace when things look not just challenging, but hopeless, keeping back doors open, all this is part of the game. However, I want to start by giving them both a chance to talk about an issue that's affecting not just our countries and the people with who are hugely vulnerable in our countries, but the whole world. Global warming and climate change are affecting not just the Tibetan Plateau, the Himalayas to the east, but also to the west. It's changing lives for hundreds of millions. Although many of us, after a sudden storm burst or a furious season of unseasonal heat, may mumble to ourselves, oh, that's climate change, without understanding what we've just said. As of next week, the heads of states of many countries will come together in Scotland to try and protect this one world that we have, because there is no planet B. We are staring at catastrophe, but it does not seem to be getting better. For instance, how do water needs in the north of India, in the Punjab, or in Punjab here, or in Punjab there, in Pakistan, what is their relation to water dependence in the tiny island nations of the Pacific, so far away from us? Political and business priorities always have taken precedence. Now, I don't know if many of you have seen this wonderful video. It's a very funny video of T-Rex, the dinosaur, the extinct dinosaur, walking into the UN General Assembly the other day. And everybody, of course, is very flustered and scared. And then he walks up or trots up to the podium and looks the security guard in the eye and says, "Are you okay? Do you need a minute?" The guy nods, he's okay. So T-Rex takes the mic and he gives a wonderful speech. But at the end of the speech, 3 words of advice: don't choose extinction. Now, having said that, I want to turn it over to, they'll get a chance also to, of course, as Mr. Chamak said, they'll get a chance also to put up their books for us to see. But we'll come to that a bit later. I thought perhaps we could hear from them on this critical issue, which is going to really which is affecting all our lives, and will affect our children's lives and our grandchildren's lives. And every species on this planet, whether you're in Punjab or in the Philippines, it doesn't matter. So, Ambassador Basit, perhaps you'd like to come in, and then Nirupama from a vision from looking down for the Tibetan heights and looking away. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hazarika. Manu, actually, मेरा ताल्लुक पंजाब तो नहीं और ना ही मैं पंजाबी बोल सकता, लेकिन कि बहरहाल बहुत खुशी हुई है माजा पंजाब दा जड़ा है थोड़ा initiative. I really appreciate and thank you for having me on this panel to talk on Pakistan-India relations, how things are, and what can we expect in the years to come. As far as climate change is concerned, obviously, Pakistan is one of the victim countries. Though we are at the stage of our development where we do need to rapidly industrialize ourselves, but obviously it has to be done in a balanced manner. And Pakistan is cognizant of its responsibilities. Therefore, our government has initiated a campaign to plant over 1 billion trees. And this is going on very, very well. And I hope that the COP26, which is meeting next week, would be able to come out with something positive, constructive, rather than concluding yet again with targets which are not achievable, especially for the developing world. So here, I think Pakistan, India, our interests converge, and in different ways we can put up joint efforts and ensure that the developed world, the industrialized world, does not get into things which are not in sync with our interests. So let's hope that things Pakistan and India, at least when it comes to climate change, are able to cooperate and cooperate meaningfully, because we had not been talking to each other for long now, and things have come to such a pass where things are becoming increasingly difficult between our two countries. But let's hope that COP26 does provide us an opportunity where our two countries, along with other developing countries, can cooperate meaningfully. Thank you very much.
Nirupama, do you want to?
Thank you, Sanjoy. And first of all, let me thank Majha House and the organizers of this webinar this evening for inviting me to be part of the panel to discuss, or to converse rather, across borders. While I presume we will tackle the larger issue, or let us say the surrounding, circumscribing issue of India-Pakistan relations during the course of our discussion this evening, since Sanjoy, who is an old friend, and I'm very happy to reconnect Sanjoy through this webinar, since he has asked both Ambassador Basit and myself to speak a little on climate change, I'll dwell briefly on the subject. Well, I think today we can hardly call it climate change. I think it's a climate crisis that is upon us, and South Asia is no exception. In fact, we in South Asia, the close to 2 billion people that inhabit this region, what we, in earlier times called the subcontinent, are used to periods of drought, cycles of drought, almost, as they speak in the Bible, of 7 years of drought following 7 years of flood and pestilence. We have had droughts, we have had floods, we have heat waves, landslides, cyclones, water scarcity, you name it. This has been a feature of our lives. And this has caused a disruption of human life. It threatens human security. Now, this begs the question how you define the whole issue of security. We have to reappraise, India and Pakistan and all of us in South Asia, we have to reappraise the security discourse. We need to restructure our interventions. We need to see the fact that we have defined conflict as an existential, all-pervasive factor of our existence. We really have to reappraise that, and we have to restructure the interventions concerned, and therefore understand that this climate crisis is a threat to human life. And I think it's very vital that we turn our focus to this. I know, as Ambassador Basit said, India and Pakistan have had very little dialogue between themselves. And I'm reminded of Iris Murdoch's statement many years ago that, we think too little of peace and we think too much of revenge. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very much for those very powerful words, both of you. But I just wanted to pick up on what you both said and link it to the, shall I say, the bilateral issue, because many of our bilateral issues, while some are large and overarching and have been there for decades, if not more, I was just reading something yesterday, and these things pop up in newspapers or at the bottom of the television ticker maybe once every 6 months. And this is about very vulnerable communities who are affected by climate change. Like, say, the waters of the Himalayas, the rivers that merge from it, nourish our lands, bring down very valuable nutrients to the sea, the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal, the Indian Ocean. But climate change, and I smell this is being affected, and fisher folk are being forced to go further and further to search for diminishing catch. So a very vulnerable, poor community that keeps getting caught in the relations between our countries, and, as I said, end up in a wine liner in a newspaper or a one ticker flash on the news on TV. They end up in jail. Many get released after years. Some never make it home. And we're talking here essentially about the fishermen who find themselves always on the wrong side of a maritime border they cannot distinguish until they're intercepted. And their crime seems to be of trying to feed their families and meeting perhaps even more the demands of a very powerful market. They have no voice or agency, and sometimes even their bodies take months to come home caught in bureaucratic tangles. Their vessels are impounded. And surely many lives are enmeshed in these simple stories. I know of cases of people who've crossed over from Pakistan into Rajasthan and the Punjab not because of anything else, they wanted to go to Bombay to see a film star. And these are the forgotten faces, the forgotten stories, but they're as part of the fabric, what makes the relationship difficult and challenging and enormously potential, for good, as anything else, not just the big stories which hog the headlines and which we all know. So would you reflect on this? Because these, I think, give us a feed into the larger picture. But let's look at the small people first, because you've probably had to deal with these issues. Whoever would like to go first.
Master Rao, would you like to?
Master Basit, you as High Commissioner from Pakistan to India, must have dealt. So
yes, I have been dealing with this unfortunate issue when our fishermen get caught, and we religiously exchange lists of those prisoners, in our custody on every 1st January and 1st of July every year. But it is also correct to a certain extent that both the countries have been, by and large, sympathetic towards fishermen. And we have been, whenever the occasion arises, the two countries have been releasing as a gesture of goodwill these fishermen. But this problem will continue, as Mr. Hazarika very rightly pointed out. This problem will continue until we have ground rules very clear, and those rules are not very clear. Hence, these fishermen at times end up, spending their whole life in prison. So this is a humanitarian issue, though it stems from the economic compulsions, no doubt about that. But it is primarily, as I look at it, a humanitarian issue and has to be dealt with or addressed accordingly. But nothing is apolitical between Pakistan and India, unfortunately. And sometimes it does happen that these fishermen spend all their life in jail in Pakistan or in India. But as far as Pakistan is concerned, I can assure you that we have in the past even unilaterally released hundreds of fishermen. I remember that when Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif was to travel to New Delhi to attend the Prime Minister-elect inauguration on the 26th and 27th of May. So the first thing which came to our Prime Minister's mind was why not to improve the atmospherics and release 200 plus Indian fishermen. And that was announced before even he arrived in New Delhi. As a matter of fact, I have been very honest with you, and I have written in my book as well that I perhaps thought at that point in time that unilateral gesture was not required, and it should have been the Prime Minister should have come to New Delhi after having met the new Prime Minister. They could have jointly announced that both are releasing their respective fishermen. But in any case, in Pakistan, we look at this issue as a humanitarian issue, and I wish that both the two countries can devise a mechanism whereby this situation does not recur as it does, and it is going on for years now. So this is what my thoughts are on this issue. Uh,
Right.
thank you.
Thank you. Nirupama, before you come in, just one thought which you may would like to reflect on. There's been a suggestion on this, and Ambassador Basit, you may also like to think about it. There's been a suggestion there should be a no arrest policy on such things, because these are people who are strayed either in a storm or because they don't have the guiding equipment, whatever it is, they've strayed across international waters or bilateral waters. And, their vessels are often impounded, and then that's even the source of the livelihood. So this is a suggestion that has come over, but perhaps Nirupama, you'd like to pick it up and look at the larger issue also.
Yes, yes, Sanjoy. Ambassador Basit has already spoken about the humanitarian nature of this issue, and I completely see the importance for both countries to see this as a humanitarian issue, that it involves a struggle for survival among these unknown Indians and Pakistanis, common men of the earth, or let us say common men of the sea, and who earn their subsistence from this occupation. This is an occupation that has gone on for millennia. It completely predates the existence of the happenings of the partition. I mean, this is something that has gone on for a span of thousands of years. And what happens is these fishermen inadvertently stray into the waters of either country, and then they get arrested and spend, as Mr. Basit said, years in prison, sometimes a lifetime in prison, and they're cut off from their families who are denied subsistence. And basically, these are fishermen from Gujarat and the Union Territory of Diu and Pakistan's Sindh country. And life in the villages on our side and life in the villages on the Pakistan side of the border are very similar for these people, which again brings home the reality that ultimately it is the common man and woman that is getting caught in between these, long-standing differences, these deep-seated differences between our two countries. So I agree with you, Sanjoy, that we have to come up with a solution that involves, people, fishermen who stray across either maritime border, being pushed back rather than being arrested, and rather than being, held in jail for so long, because the lives of these families, of these fishermen, are shattered once, these arrests take place and their breadwinners disappear. I remember when I was Foreign Secretary, a little before that, in 2008, India and Pakistan had formed a judicial committee on prisoners consisting of 4 retired judges of the higher judiciary from either country. And these members of this committee used to visit prisons and meet the prisoners, look into the status of their cases, issue of repatriation, of help. And the last such meeting was held, I believe, in October 2013. It hasn't met since then. There's been a move to revive the committee a few years ago, but I don't believe things have moved forward. So I think it's time for us to consider, pragmatic solutions that safeguard the survival of these poor fishermen of both sides. And I agree that we have to take a humanitarian view and understand that the subsistence and survival of ordinary people is involved in all this.
I'd just like to pick up on that theme that the sub-theme of ordinary people, their lives being affected, because everybody's lives are affected by relations between the two countries. It's not as if one can be sitting somewhere in the extreme northeast and not be affected by what's happening on this side, or somebody would be on the other side of Pakistan would be affected by what's happening here. And but what would either both of you like to say a little? Could you both of you say a little bit here about what can ordinary people do? Because I think there's a great sense of helplessness also, because the media is almost not there in terms of speaking on these issues with a rational voice. What are the best ways of engagement by ordinary people, just as we are doing it today? We're doing, maybe this is an elite group that is meeting, but how can this be expanded? I mean, I'd like to ask you that.
Would you like me to come in?
Yes, please.
Well, I gave this some thought, Sanjoy, while I was preparing for this evening's conversation. And I'd like to dwell on the word conversation. The shortest way, as it has been said, to build a bridge is to have a conversation. So when you think of how we can connect, we have a tradition, as you know, of sharing stories in the subcontinent, all across. The whole tradition of storytelling, the tradition of what we call katha in India, the katha parampara as it's called. It's very much a part of our DNA in South Asia beyond borders, and it obliterates divides. It's the shortest way, as it's been said, the shortest way between two people is a conversation. So I think first and foremost, we need to start with conversations, and that's not happening at the moment. Somehow a kind of negativity has been applied to just the very concept of human conversation between people of both countries, regardless of what strata they belong to or what their status may be, or where they're coming from. Like, you mentioned the Northeast. I come from what you would call the peninsula, that part of India that is washed by the sea on all sides. It's a very different perspective that perhaps one possesses because of the fact that one belongs to that, part of the country that is so different from the Indo-Gangetic plain. But all the same, it's very important, I think, to have an imagination about what our futures can be, whether they're good, whether they're bad, whether they're ugly. But that imagination has to be colored by good sense, by reason, because otherwise the future is going to be hopeless for us. So I think in our region, we have to cultivate openness. We have to embrace a diversity of voices, whether, you come from Punjab or you come from the Northeast, or whether you come from Kerala, as I do, or, Ambassador Basit sitting in Pakistan. We have to embrace diversity. And I think the fault, as they say, dear Brutus, lies not in the stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. We have grafted a 20th century vision onto the India-Pakistan relationship, and we are trying to bring that forcibly onto a 21st century stage. And that is a recipe for impending disaster. You spoke of climate change. You spoke of all the issues that concern us today, whether it's connectivity, whether it's trade, whether it's livelihoods, whether, it's women's empowerment. And where do all these reside when you look at the larger canvas of how we define India-Pakistan relations? It's really, I think we should all bow our heads in shame when we think of that. So the challenge is, how do you get people to think differently? And, we live in an age of digital technologies, as the world of the pandemic has shown. And how are we thinking of creating that South Asian commons? Let it be a digital public square. Let it be a digital commons to begin with. Let it become the site of numerous conversations. And just through simple language, let's understand the complexity of our challenges, but with reason and imagination. And I think the stress, if you remember Dag Hammarskjöld, one of the early UN Secretary Generals, he advocated quiet diplomacy. And what you see today is completely in contrast to that. The mass media drives the whole debate. I remember Mr. Jaswant Singh, the former foreign minister of India, used to say that diplomacy cannot be transacted in an amphitheater. But that's where we transact it today. The mass media is misused for harmful propaganda. Competitive conditions prevail. There's a tendency to play up conflict, because conflict is much more dramatic than agreement. And, poorly informed publicity about issues. We saw that happening at the Agra summit, Sanjoy, where I think you were also witness to it, where, the privacy of quiet diplomacy would have been essential to achieve a constructive result. We don't do that today. And let me say that people have to get out of their boxes. We're all boxed in. We're too boxed in. And we have to have these conversations across disciplines. Diplomats like us must speak to district administrators to understand grassroots level concerns and realities. Scientists must speak to historians. Self-help organizations must speak with business people. The illiterate must speak to the literate. Students must address politicians. The ecologists should speak to the climate deniers. We like being in and among our own tribe, but we have to get out of our boxes and share ideas and go from local to global to local and get the region to understand how we've missed the boat. So, I wonder whether that day will ever come when joy is great and sorrow small, as the song goes. But there's too much anger and aggression around us. And how do we mitigate it? We're just stuck in our time warps and we derive our security from it. So how will we redefine borders between countries such as ours is the big challenge today. There's too much blood and gore, and it doesn't seem to go away.
Well, that's both hopeful and depressing. It sums up in a way the condition of our lives and the condition of the world and all around us. But Ambassador Saab, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Ambassador Rao. As someone said, that opportunities multiply as they are seized. But the question is, have we been able to or willing to seize those opportunities and then multiply them? It all sounds great that Pakistan and India should have more and more people-to-people contacts, people should converse, should talk to each other. But, at the end of the day, in my own assessment, I think it comes down to our political leadership and whether or not they have the courage, political will to grasp a moment and take decisive, difficult decisions. Unless that happens, I think that he will continue to be, caught in a time warp, as Ambassador Rao very correctly said. We will be taking one step forward, two steps back. We will come, then, consume our energies to break a deadlock, and then, spend a few years talking to each other, and then put up, a few confidence building measures. But at the end of the day, nothing really moves forward. If today we are talking about fishermen, about, other small issues which could have been have resolved, long ago, if you are still grappling with such issues, you can imagine how difficult things are between our two countries. And in my view, unless the leadership on both on the two sides muster that courage and show statesmanship as to how we can get the two countries, lift the two countries from this morass, it will continue to be very difficult. You will see many barriers between our two peoples, between the two countries, and everything will be ephemeral, temporary. And we need to get out of this, I think, situation and put ourselves on an irreversible trajectory, positive trajectory, so that things do not come back to square one. That is the challenge in my view, and we have not been up to this challenge, both in New Delhi and Islamabad, I would say. And I agree with Ambassador Rao that these days most of the diplomacy is being conducted, in the public domain. It's no more quiet diplomacy as it should have been. I remember many meetings between our two countries where before the leaders come out, the media would already know. And in Islamabad, the story is kind of, along the lines as being fed by the Pakistan government. And in the Indian media, you see the talking points fed by the Indian government. So the entire diplomacy has become a kind of propaganda, and we need to come out of this mindset. And unless that happens, and the leadership is really ready to be courageous enough to take difficult decisions, I doubt very much that things would really improve in an irreversible manner.
There are lots of questions which are coming in the chat, and I'm conscious of the fact that you do need to read from your books as well, and I would very much hope that you can do that now. and hold up your books. But before you do that, I'm going to actually contest the whole idea of public diplomacy and private diplomacy, because you've actually in your book, Nirupama and Ambassador Basit, I'm waiting for your books to arrive, so I hope they'll be here by Monday. But certainly, Ambassador Basit, in your book, you've looked at very private initiatives that were taken to calm things down. Are there any sort of peace building, confidence building measures that you can reflect on, which are now in the public domain because of what you've said? And then we can go to your books and then to the Q&A.
No, many confidence building measures. For example, I remember discussing in detail with Mr. Ajit Doval, your national security advisor. We used to have very long meetings, and I always enjoyed talking to him on Pakistan-India relations as to what the specific confidence building measures can be taken. First challenge used to be that how to consolidate and build on the existing confidence building measures. Because, as we have seen over the years, especially during the last 2-3 years, that even the existing confidence building measures are under threat and they are kind of unraveling. First challenge is how to build on and consolidate the existing confidence building measures. I remember one issue which we would often discuss was the Siachen glaciers and how to turn it into a green park sort of thing. At one stage, I reckoned that perhaps we would be kind of close to doing that, but then things fell apart because 2016 was a very difficult year for our two countries, starting from Pathankot incident, and then other things happening. So 2016, in December 2015, we were all very upbeat when Prime Minister Modi made a stopover en route from Kabul to New Delhi. And that was the moment we thought that we could break new grounds. And then the Indian Foreign Secretary, Mr. Jaishankar, was to visit Pakistan on the 15th of January 2016. But then the Pathankot, unfortunately, again, brought us back to square one. And again, we started looking for ways and means as to how to resume the dialogue or talks about talks. So confidence building measures, Siachen is one area I think we can work on. And that, again, as they say, kind of a low-hanging fruit. But even that has become very difficult to realize. Whether or not our two countries able to do that, I do not know. But whenever the talk process begins, these are the issues I think which we can handle upfront, and then see how things really pan out eventually. But Siachen is one area. Salt Creek is another area, confidence building measure where the two countries can work together and sort out these two issues.
What I'm going to suggest is, I would suggest that you read from your books, each of you from an excerpt from your book. We'll go to the Q&A briefly, but I would like to come back to you because I would like to look at again something that you've said, both of you. I think Ambassador Basit was a bit more, shall we say, skeptical about the public engagement. But I think what Nirupama said about the digital space, I don't think we've explored that enough. You can have 1,000 people in a room. You can't do that even in an auditorium nowadays. But you can have 1,000 people in a digital space. I mean, or even 100 or even 10. Start like the one we have. We have 70 people today across both countries. So this is possible. Both processes should continue side by side. One cannot stop because the other is stopped. I think that's the critical thing. But too often our things have got stuck because one process has stopped. But now, may I request Nirupama to perhaps read briefly from her book and hold the book up?
I will. Before I do that, Sanjoy, let me just briefly address some of the issues that Ambassador Basit raised. Issues like Siachen, to a lesser extent, Sir Creek, I have always now, with the benefit of hindsight, I realize hindsight can never be 2020. But with the benefit of hindsight, I would say that there are in India-Pakistan issues, India-Pakistan relations, certain issues that are of a volcanic nature. Even if the volcano is dormant for some time, it erupts from time to time, constantly. And how do we make it extinct? Maybe we need T-Rex to come in here, as you mentioned, Sanjoy, and really deal with that. But this question of trade, of connectivity, and I was reading Pallavi Raghavan's book about animosity at bay in the first years after partition between India and Pakistan, where both countries recognize that partition is an irrevocable reality. There's nothing, you can't, put Humpty Dumpty together again, literally. So you have to deal with that irrevocable reality, and each country should help the other, structure the relationship in such a way that we are able to build more resilience into the relationship. This is a relationship that is totally devoid of resilience today. Totally. It just needs a Pathankot. It needs a Mumbai. It needs a Pulwama. It needs a Bagalkot just to collapse. Each time you try to build it up, the bricks are put together and each time they collapse. So I think we have to adopt a different formula, a different approach as far as this relationship is concerned. Let's look at those early years. Even before 1965, we had railway traffic between the two countries. We had more trade. We had more interaction. We had more people-to-people contact. Diplomacy was pursued at a certain level. And I think, it's time we acquired that grown-up quality, that maturity to re-look at some of these things. I'll stop here. So here's my book. This is the Fractured. Can you see it? And it's published by Penguin Random House. It's just arrived in the bookstores this week. And I'm quite thrilled to actually hold it. It's quite a big book. It's almost 600 pages. And it's involved some extensive research. It took about 4 years to write. It's been a labor of love. So really speaking, I look at the relationship between India, Tibet, and China from 1949 to 1962. It also has some references to Pakistan, Ambassador Basit. When you read it, you will be able to come across those references. You may ask why this period. I have focused on this period because this essentially is the period in which the relationship between India and China, as we see it today, was essentially formed. A lot of the issues that continue to divide us, that continue to occupy us, date back to this period of the relationship. So my idea was to use the knowledge that I gained as a practitioner, as a diplomat practitioner, to write a history. So it's a history from the practitioner's point of view. And the idea is to educate the younger generation, particularly of Indians, about the nature of this relationship. I will just read briefly from, this is at the end of the book, actually, in what I call the coda. As you know, a coda is in music. It's a section of music that kind of comes towards the end of a composition. So, I'm reading from actually page 464 of the book. The centrality of margins and peripheries in this framework of frontiers is scarcely recognized today. Although specific country situations differ, the borderlands of India and China, be they Kashmir, northeastern India, Tibet, and Xinjiang, are not the primary focus when it comes to understanding frontiers and their fractured geographies. Frustrations among the youth, ethnic nationalisms, issues of identity, self-determination, human rights, geographical isolation, the use of armed force by the state, cross-border terrorism, and questions about governance straddle these borderlands. They have tended to be viewed as targets of central government policy radiating from national capitals rather than as areas that possess their own ecosystems of existence, where policy must focus on local issues that directly impact the lives of people. The concept of frontier zones, which historically provided for an intermingling of peoples, allowing the retention of close integration across borders between communities in terms of language, custom, and religion, has been lost. Geopolitics trumps all. Borders congeal and conceal transnational borderlands that cannot speak for themselves, since Delhi and Beijing must quit playing ventriloquist in order that these distinct voices are heard. Thank you.
That's really, really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's mellifluous, like you're singing in your music. Ambassador sir, please.
First of all, congrats to Ambassador Rao for her book, and looking forward to, inshallah, reading it as soon as it is available in Pakistan. I do not know when, but Mr. Chamak has promised, committed to send one to me.
Yes,
Okay.
you should just
Now,
send it across border, actually.
I would take this opportunity when Nirupama Rao ji would send me her own signed copy for you, sir.
Okay.
I would
So
send
this
it.
is my book, Hostility, and it was published this year by Harper Hollins in India and by Light Stone Publishers in Pakistan. So this book is primarily dwells on, covers my stint in New Delhi. It is not a history book, does not dwell on Pakistan-India relations from 1947 onwards. It is about those 3-4 years which I have spent in New Delhi, and it covers that period and how we were able or were not able to take decisions, how we try to engage with each other, break log jams, and try to move forward, and how things would come back to, would unravel. So primarily it is a book which is based on my own experiences and how I kind of moved around in India, what was my own mission statement, and whether or not I had the support of my own government, and how I tried to conduct myself vis-a-vis the Indian government, official India, and with how to reach out to the people of India, where I would always be welcomed and welcomed rather very, very warmly. I think I am the only High Commissioner who was able to use the pulpit of Jamia Masjid and Fatehpuri Masjid, the mosque in New Delhi, and I addressed on the occasions of Eid al-Fitr and as well as during Ramadan, the month of Ramadan. So those are the experiences which I try to cover in this book. So I would read a few excerpts from my introduction of this book, because that would give you an idea as to what this book is all about. Some in Pakistan and many in India continue to hold me responsible for not being able to build on the Modi Sharif meeting. In fact, I am blamed, especially in India, for deliberately undermining the significant opportunities that had arisen. To them, I was uncompromisingly hawkish toward my host country and perhaps the most bellicose Pakistan High Commissioner in India ever. Instead of contributing to building bridges, I was a source of exacerbating bilateral tensions, making sure that the initiative taken to break deadlocks led to more deadlocks. In short, it was primarily because of me that Pakistan and India had not been able to take advantage of the bonhomie that the two prime ministers were able to generate and tried their utmost to retain even the most difficult of circumstances. Some would even suggest that I was working at the behest of the Pakistan establishment, and worked in close coordination with them rather than pursuing the peaceful aspirations of the civilian leadership. This book is not an attempt to clarify my position or put the entire onus of recurring setbacks on others and cast aspersions. Throughout my stay in India, I did what I thought was in the best interest of Pakistan and in sync with the strategic framework of Pakistan's India policy. Even now, with the advantage of hindsight, I can say with complete honesty and conviction that I would not have conducted myself differently. Diplomats, like other human beings, do come under pressure and at times do take decisions that may appear unintelligent and even undiplomatic. But how decisions are made is not always clear to outsiders. Thus, it is not uncommon to find analysts and experts forming and presenting their opinions driven by their own predilections and national prejudices. At the public level, opinions are usually formed with half-truths and on the basis of what is shared or not shared by governments. Many developments taking place off stage are made public to the extent possible, and rightly so, as diplomacy is not any other profession. Here, one is required confidentiality even long after decisions have been taken. Accordingly, I will not be able to share many facets of our India policy and diplomacy, as Pakistan's interest takes precedence over everything else. But hostility will still reveal many inside details hitherto unknown to the people on both sides of the border. Thank you very much. I can read one more paragraph if you allow me.
Yes, please go ahead.
Please do, sir. Please do.
People who are in the business of diplomacy know full well that there are multiple dependent and independent variables that shove and shape interstate relations. When relations are deeply rooted in hostility and mistrust, the space for diplomatic maneuverability is discouragingly limited. Positions on issues are profoundly entrenched, and showing flexibility even at the tactical level becomes hugely problematic and controversial. Both Pakistan and India have been facing the same dilemma almost from the very outset of their independence. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for reading those two excerpts. And I think Majha House has put the Amazon links for your both your books on the chat, and I would urge people to order their copies. Although there is a problem if they want autographed copies, I don't know how they'll get that. They'll have to go to a book signing or a book fest or something like that. I have there are many questions in the chat, and I will pick a couple. Can we go for? We're at 7 o'clock, I know, and usually things end around 7.
No problem, sir. No problem.
Another 15 minutes or so?
Yeah. Please.
Okay. There are two quick questions which have come up right at the beginning. Let me just... one is actually from Preeti, and she was talking about... Preeti, why don't you speak your suggestion rather than my paraphrasing your question?
So Preeti, yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I had a bit of a problem earlier, and so joined, just on time. I think just when you started. I was really, because the fact is that one is living now in Amritsar part of the time, and this whole thing seems so much more alive because I'm not in Delhi and I'm in Amritsar, and the border is nearby, and everything that happens affects you directly. And so therefore that is what, and through this whole thing that we've been going through this entire month of the Sanjha Punjab dialogues and all these interactions, listening to poetry, listening to personal stories, discussions about books, etc. What comes through is this intense, interest, curiosity, even desire to know about each other, to be able to travel across easily, to be able to find the people that one seems to have lost. And it's not for me, but I think a lot of us in the North have these memories which have come down through families. And so it just seems like such a loss to not be able to do that. So when we've had these interactions, all of it seems to come out in the chat and in the interactions that we've had. And yet when we talk about states, and because both of you are representing that, one just wonders why and what. So, something about what happens behind the scenes and why can we not meet, and why can things not be easier between us, because we want this meeting.
Preeti, I wish I could give you a cogent reply to that. I, as an Indian, and I don't speak just as a professional diplomat here, but as a citizen of the country, I realize that we can never come into that position of greatness that we want to attain as a country until and unless we settle our problems with our neighbors and are able to continue to grow the economy, to take our rightful place in the front line of nations. And I think that political vision, that moment of enlightenment, I believe, has yet to come as far as the country is concerned. The second point is about diplomacy, I mentioned quiet diplomacy. There is no quiet diplomacy between India and Pakistan. Everything is determined and driven by the amphitheater. To quote Mr. Jaswant Singh once again, he told me at the end of the Agra summit, he said, too many midwives, but the baby was stillborn. And I think the baby is always stillborn because of the very many midwives around. And you see, thirdly, as far as the whole issue of propaganda and public diplomacy, I mean, not that public diplomacy is propaganda, but there is a debate being driven in both countries by media organizations. It's not diplomacy that's happening between the two countries. It's as if the policymakers are constantly looking behind their shoulders to see what the public is saying, what the public wants. And I, for the life of me, cannot understand why we cannot muster the courage and tell the public that, good sense demands that we talk to our neighbors, that we think of structuring relationships that are multidimensional, that are not just, solely focused on one or two issues, because that's what drives the news cycle and the news line, because that's what is sensational, that's what makes the news. Unfortunately, that moment hasn't come. I think we're still waiting for that nirvana moment. And I think we must be prepared to look at these, the normal business of living, about communication, about conversations, about railway lines, connecting with each other, about flights to each other's countries, about students talking to each other. And that's just not happening. I had a wonderful conversation with the Pakistani singer Ali Sethi last year. And if you care to look at it, it's on the website of The Wire. I'm sure Maja House can share the link with the audience here. And, we were talking about music because as you know, I founded the South Asian Symphony Orchestra, and we don't have any Pakistani members in that orchestra. We have a lot of Afghans, we have Nepalese, we have Sri Lankans, we have even a Bangladeshi, we have a Bhutanese, but we don't have any Pakistanis. And it's just not been possible to contemplate the inclusion of a Pakistani in the symphony orchestra. Well, that's the way the cookie crumbles. But when Ali Sethi and I spoke about this, the common musical connections between the two countries, and the way, there is a certain, rhythm, a certain heartbeat that seems so similar when you talk about these things. We talked about one of the I think it's one of the Ismaili saints in Gujarat. And there is a poem, a very old, maybe 13th or 14th century poem called the Bhuj Niranjan. Now, Niranjan is the word we use to describe Vishnu, or one of the Hindu gods. But this is an Islamic poem, the Bhuj Niranjan. It's a devotional poem. And we've lost that connection today. We've lost the poetry. Everything is not just prose, it's the most prosaic and the most low-level kind of conversations that happen between the two countries. So I speak perhaps as a poet, as a somebody who's interested in the arts when I'm saying all this. I may not sound like a diplomat, but I have practiced diplomacy also, and I think it's possible, to think of these things when we craft policy also.
Absolutely. I mean, I hate this word soft diplomacy, but often I think the anchors are not representing anybody except their own bosses and their own TRP ratings, which are fixed. So I wouldn't go by that anyway, and everybody just needs to call them out, whoever can. But Ambassador Basit, do you have something here? And then I think we could end perhaps with a suggestion which Preeti has given. I know we don't have much more time. Perhaps that Nirupama, after Ambassador Basit speaks, and you both have, if you have any concluding points, because I think this is not a way we can conclude. This is not an issue that can be concluded in an hour and a quarter, but we need more conversations, just exactly as you've been saying, more conversations to keep the conversation going, to make the conversation a dialogue, and the dialogue to move to another level. But Ambassador Basit, if you would kindly come in.
Diplomacy, as they say, is the art of the possible. But when it comes to Pakistan and India, unfortunately, this intricate yet exciting art seems to be losing its effectiveness, or creativity for that matter. And I really do not know how we can even do small things which may eventually help to build some mutual trust. But my own assessment, as I look at Pakistan and the relations, I at times, get very, very pessimistic about the future of this relationship, because I do not see any real desire on the part of those who really matter at the end of the day to resolve the core issues which continue to bedevil our relationship. And unless you do that, it becomes very difficult to think of ways and means as to how we can build bridges of trust, because there is the mistrust between the two countries is so deep that you cannot really help. You feel helpless, as a matter of fact. And that is the dilemma. That is the irony of our relationship. And I would still, we can always talk to each other on these, we can have these conversations. But we have already wasted 74 years of our, existence as Pakistan and India. Would you like to waste another 70, 80 years in this process of talking to each other? I think more than talking, we need to resolve our problems. And I fully understand that without talking, you cannot really do much about these issues. But the question is, are the two sides really serious? Can they move with sincerity and seriousness of purpose to resolve those issues? Because we have, in the past tried two approaches. One was to first have confidence building measures in the hope that those would help us to have a congenial, conducive atmosphere, environment, and that would help us to then resolve the long-standing issues like Kashmir, for that matter. And the other approach which Pakistan very firmly espoused was, no, first we need to resolve the core issues, and then we can talk of the confidence building measures. And then we came up with a kind of hybrid solution of a composite dialogue. Even that did not work somehow. The back channel, and I think the best period in our recent history was from 2004 to 2007, where the two sides did engage in quiet diplomacy. We did try to discuss all the real issues which required to be settled. But then, unfortunately, Mumbai happened, and again, and then so many things since then. So I have come to the conclusion that in order to build mutual trust, build bridges of trust and confidence, it is important that we get to grips with difficult issues first. Otherwise, we will keep talking to each other, we will continue having these conversations, but rest assured, they will take us nowhere unless the core issues are resolved.
Well, I think one of the, sorry, Nirupama, you're going to come in. I know we're running out of time, but there are two things that I would like to say. One is, whether it's the core issues or whatever, there is this concern that there are non-state actors at play, which, and we don't need to get into that. I'm just mentioning it as a fact of life, which seem to queer the pitch. And there is a question from Iftikhar Gilani in the chat about why aren't India and Pakistan at least working together, thinking together on glacial melt on specific glacier. He talks about the Kolhai Glacier in Kashmir, one of the largest glaciers in the Himalayas. So, that perhaps could be taken up some other time, but you may like to think about that. Nirupama, I'm sorry.
Yes, Sanjay. No, taking off from where Mr. Basit ended, the whole issue of core subjects, the core issues between India and Pakistan, they cannot be tackled in the public. You cannot be talking of India-Pakistan summits where you have 1,000 representatives of the media entering the stadium to cheer either side. You cannot transact diplomacy like that. So I think you need quiet diplomacy to tackle the core issues, the volcanic issues, as I call them. And as far as the business of normal day-to-day life is concerned, I think that is something we need to look at simultaneously. From Pakistan's side, it's always been an issue of tackling the core issues before we do everything else. And I think you need to reorient your approach when it comes to this. Not that, I am in a position to change opinions on any side, but I think we have to take a more practical, more hands-on approach to the whole business of normal day-to-day communication between the two countries. And as Sanjoy rightly pointed out, the whole issue of non-state actors and what in India we call cross-border terrorism has to be understood. I know that Pakistan, tells us that they have also been victims of terrorism and, they have also suffered on this count. But I'm just talking about how we in India have come to regard the whole aspect of Pakistan's attitude towards India and how the whole question of cross-border terrorism and the role played by non-state actors has become such an overarching issue in the relationship. So these, I think, are all on the table before us, and we have to be aware of this. We cannot deflect our attention from any of these. But quiet diplomacy is the need of the hour. And I think from my own experience and my, being in the trenches for many years, I know that, if one is going to be completely guided by the compass of how, public opinion is to lead the debate on these issues, we're not going to get anywhere. I know public opinion is the lifeblood of diplomacy, but public opinion on these sort of divisive issues has to be properly informed, has to be properly educated, and that is the responsibility of us as policymakers.
Thank you. And I think all of us, Ambassador Basit, you would also agree that that is a very coherent way of putting it, that all of us have to be really on the same boat, if not on the same boat, or similar boats rowing in the same direction, Otherwise, you're going in
No,
completely
I
different
mean,
direction.
frankly speaking, we all, whether it is Pakistan or India, we all want to live like as good neighbors, to have normal relations. Nobody can question that because that is in our mutual interest. Look at what is happening to South Asia. There is hardly any intra-regional trade. And I mean, it goes without saying that it is in our mutual interest to have a good, normal relationship. And then, but we have to be realistic. This is what I'm trying to underscore. We can always have a long list of wish list, but the question is that so far we have been working through slapdash approaches, and that hasn't worked so far. So my own the composite dialogue which I refer to, that was a combination of moving simultaneously on difficult issues as well as on I mean, having some confidence building measures in place as well. But even that did not work somehow. And I remember that during the late Sushma Swaraj's visit to Pakistan in December 2015, how the two, it was a marathon session. We could not even agree on word comprehensive bilateral dialogue. So bilateral became a big big issue for the two countries. So if that is the level of trust which or the mistrust which exists between the two countries, how can you really think of having positive conversations? So my point, which we do have problems. You have issues vis-a-vis Pakistan, no question about that. But I have been trying to think as to how could the two countries resolve these problems once and for all, because we have been talking for too long, for decades, but not resolving our problems. And if you still like to have that kind of an approach, then good luck to all of us. But I do not see that things will move forward. We will continue to be in this time warp, unfortunately.
Well, I think we just have to keep going at whatever we are doing. We need to do it. We need to do it better, and we need to be committed to what we're doing. It may take, if you wait for somebody else to do the job, the government, it'll never happen. So what we're doing, what you're doing, what Nirupama Rao is doing, what Majha House is doing, all these are efforts that come together. They make a difference. Whether it's one drop that makes the ocean or not, that's not really the issue. The question is, are we committed to doing this for a long period of time? Some of us have started doing this only in the last few years. It's new for us. So we are newbies in the game. And newbies bring new ideas. So the old ideas may not last. They need to be thrown away. So we need to bring in new ideas, like a new digital space for music and for people to sing together and talk together and meet together. Why not? I mean, the fishermen's families, they're completely off the grid. Who brings them together? Who can bring them together? That's a very simple thing. So they share each other's pain. And as the old saying said, by sharing, grief is muted and happiness grows. But I wanted to ask Nirupama if she'd be kind enough to just share one story of the South Asian symphony orchestra's journey, which is close to her, and she can perhaps close with that and hand it back to Arvinder.
Thank you. Thank you, Sanjoy, for giving me that opportunity. The South Asian Symphony Orchestra was essentially founded by my husband and myself in 2018. And in 2019, we held two concerts of the symphony in Bombay and in Bangalore. And we call the orchestra is called Chirag. And you know what the word Chirag means. It means a little lamp that illuminates. So the idea is to illuminate the darkness around us, as it were. Why a symphony? Because a symphony, instills habits of cooperation among people, because you have to work together in a symphony. You share a desk, for instance, and you have to cultivate the art of listening to the other person. You have to play in tandem. Everybody has a role. Nobody is big, nobody is small. And I think when it comes to the concept of South Asia and the integration within South Asia, I think the image and the symbolism of an orchestra works very well. So our first orchestra performance was in Bombay in April at the National Center for the Performing Arts, April 2019. And one of the trademarks of the orchestra is not just to play symphonic compositions that are known around the world, which we try and do, but also for each concert to create a piece of music that belongs to this region. So we played a symphonic composition called Humsafar at the first concert, which used folk tunes from each of the South Asian nations, in fact, from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from India, from Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. We brought it together and created a symphonic composition called Humsafar. Please go on to the channel of the South Asian Symphony Orchestra and Foundation on YouTube. Maybe Maja House can bring it up on the screen, and you will see a list of all the compositions that we have played at these concerts. The second concert was dedicated to Mahatma Gandhi, and we had a composition called Ideas of Freedom, which again was an original composition, which you can hear being played. We've also used a lot of popular, including Bollywood music, in our concerts, but we also play classical music from the international, list of famous compositions. So the second concert was dedicated to both Beethoven and Gandhi. And as you know, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was used by Dag Hammarskjöld as a symbol for building international peace. So we are trying to weave, the concept of peace and reconciliation and integration through the image of a symphony orchestra with the South Asian Symphony Orchestra. And recently, after the collapse of the Afghan government in Kabul, we tried to help a number of Afghan musicians who were stranded there to leave the country, especially one of them whom I was able to personally assist. And she's now in a very prestigious music academy in the United States. So in our small way also, we tried to help the musicians in Afghanistan, who are very, very dear to our hearts. The youngest member of our orchestra is a 13-year-old from Kabul, actually. Now, of course, in Qatar, but earlier in Kabul. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop talking now. I know that there are lots of questions we have not been able to ask, and I can only request Preeti and Maja House to make another session where this dialogue, this conversation will continue, stage 2, and we'll have more people. And Arvindo, back to you.
Thank you, Sanjay. And I'm quite optimistic about the relations and the peace in this region between India and Pakistan as neighbors, that we have seen peace with the East Germany and West Germany, with North Korea and South Korea. We must pray. And मैंने ख्वाबों की तदबीर बदलती देखी है, देखे हैं मैंने रुख हवाओं के बदलते चमक. My humble suggestion would be that हमसे अदब छीना गया. Literature को हमने अपनी तरफ जुबानों का और मज़हबों का नाम देके हमने तोड़ दिया. If we are able to bring back that literature, the bond, the commonality, हर इंसान मिलना चाहता है, और वो bond बनेगा लिटरेचर से, और हवाओं के रुख बदलेंगे. और जिस डिप्लोमेसी की बात हम सब यहाँ पे कर रहे हैं, the governments would have to hear the public sound. उनको आवाज मिलेगी, और ये बड़े सगीर वापस अपनी उस जगह पे अपनी शान बढ़ाएगा. And let me tell my dear audience that निरुपमा जी ने अभी बहुत बात की सिम्फनी की. She herself is a wonderful singer too. I know it. और कभी मौका बनेगा तो पार्ट 2 में बासित साहब और निरुपमा जी के हम फिर वो जो नगमे हैं वो भी इसका पार्ट बनाएंगे. But let me thank Nirupama ji, let me thank my dear friend and my mentor Abdul Basit Saab, and let me thank Sanjoy Hazarika ji for this beautiful conversation. मुझे लगता था कि इनिशियली हम ज्यादा क्लाइमेट पे चले गए, लेकिन जो हमारी पीस बिल्डिंग की बात थी, जो हार्मनी की बात थी, जो एक दूसरे के साथ ताल्लुक रिश्ते की बात थी, कहीं ना कहीं वो बीच में अटक रही थी. तो मुझे लगता था कि आई वाज ट्राइंग टू गेट संजॉय कि हम वापस उसी जगह पे अपनी बात को करें, क्योंकि हमने पूरे मंथ में, अक्टूबर में, वी हैव सीन लॉट ऑफ लव, एक दूसरे के लिए इतने कंपैशन, इतनी एम्पैथी, इतना प्यार, इतनी मोहब्बत, इतना इखलाक, इतनी ज्यादा ताकत एक दूसरे के साथ महसूस की है दैट आई डोंट हैव वर्ड्स टू पुट इनटू. बट यस, दिस इज आवर अर्नेस्ट डिजायर, प्रेयर एंड होप कि हदें सर हदें रहें. वो नो वन कैन डिनाई, एज निरुपमा जी सेड, कि वो वापस नहीं हो सकती, लेकिन जो एक दूसरे के साथ प्यार मोहब्बत, वी हैव सीन इन द लास्ट 74 years, वी हैव सीन अप्स एंड डाउन्स आए हैं, लेकिन उसमें इतना प्यार भी फैला है. एक आर्टिस्ट, एक लोग दूसरे से मिले हैं, और वो जो एक कॉन्सेप्ट बना हुआ था, फियर बना हुआ था कि पता नहीं बॉर्डर की उस जानिब लोग कैसे हैं, बॉर्डर की इस जानिब लोग कैसे हैं, जब मिलते हैं तो पता चलता है कि नहीं, वो तो ऐसे ही हैं जैसे हम हैं, और एक दूसरे के साथ ऐसी मोहब्बत का रिश्ता है. तो विद दिस नोट मैं आप सबसे मैं आपको शुक्रिया अदा कहूंगा. बासित साहब शुक्रिया, निरुपमा जी शुक्रिया, संजय, एंड थैंक्स टू ऑल द लिसनर्स एंड ऑल आवर को-पार्टनर्स हु जिन्होंने हमारे साथ ताउन किया, जिन्होंने हमारे साथ शमूलियत की इस पूरे सांझा पंजाब के इस खूबसूरत फेस्टिवल को आगे लेके जाने में. और मुझे पुरुम्मीद हूं मैं कि आने वाले दिनों में हम ऐसे सेशंस के साथ एक फिजिकल सेशंस भी करेंगे यहाँ अमृतसर में और लाहौर में, और आने वाले दिनों में व्हाट आई सी कि हम बिल्कुल वैसे ही मिलेंगे जैसे पहले कभी मिला करते थे.
Arvinder, may I just come in briefly here?
Please.
Because I'd like to quote from what Ali Sethi said at the end of our conversation. He sang this actually. I can't sing, but he says, "Ishq ki chingariyon ko fir hawa dene lage, घूम हुए जो रास्ते मेरे पता देने लगे," which means members of my longing have been flamed again. The lost trail remembers the way again.
See, चढ़दे पंजाब ते लहंदे पंजाब, पंजाब दे विच किन्नी मिलन दी तांग है, किन्नी longingness है to be with, or we wish that spark to be there. And with the mentors like you at the helm of affairs, I think probably we'll be able to achieve that path of love and harmony again for this entire region. So thank you so very much. Over to Preeti ji.
Thank you, Aminda. This is just to reiterate the thanks, and also to say a big thank you to the entire team of Majha House, which has worked really hard, despite many of them being quite unwell. There's lots of illnesses going around, dengue and even COVID, and all kinds of stuff has been happening. But right from making those creative posts to finally having the conversation, I'm really grateful to each one who has put together body and soul to make this festival happen. And Arvinder ji, to you for the concept and for all of Sanjha Punjab. Thank you very much, our speakers today. I did speak from the heart, and I spoke as somebody who has started to live in Amritsar very recently, over the past 3 years or so. And where I see this feeling being completely palpable in the air almost, this curiosity and this interest and this desire. And I speak from that space, therefore. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sanjoy, for putting together the conversation as well.